In this video, I would like to record a couple things in Excel, starting with talking about building lists, creating conditional formatting, using the Autofilter to find records, analyzing a list with the Subtotals command, and using the pivot table feature, as well as pivot table charts. So when you're working in Excel, you start with building your list. And in this example, you can see I have a list of sales reps, regions, months, sales, and magazines. The list is just really the collection of rows and columns that you see that are formatted. And it does have some rules that it follows. And you can create rules by doing formatting and different things to your list that way. You can bold them like we've done here in the top. You can do things like change the formatting. For instance, you can see sales has currencies with it. Now, once you have your list built, then you can start doing things like sorting the rows and columns. Right now, I think most people have used the sorting feature in Excel, but I want to introduce you to some more advanced types of sorting as well, which can be very useful. So in Excel, if you go ahead and you go under your data, you will see that there's a sort option. Okay, you need to make sure that you, if you're sorting one row, you would just be able to go A to Z. You could select the column. But if you want to do a more advanced type sort, if you click on the sort, you will see a dialog box pop up. By default, it circled the data that I had available in there. And you'll see that you can have the drop-down box, and it takes the header, and it lets me decide what I want to sort for. So the first thing I would like to sort for is sales rep, and I'm going to leave that A to Z. I can add then another level. It'll sort first by that, then it will sort by magazine, and I'll leave that A to Z as well. And then last, we will put a third sort level in here. So we're going to add another level, and we're going to go by sales, and we're going to do this one smallest to largest. Or if you drop the box down, you can see we could have picked largest to smallest, or even done a custom list. But we're going to leave it smallest to largest. I want you to go ahead and I want you to click OK. And you'll see it's sorted here by sales rep, then magazine, and then from smallest to largest in sales. Now, there are other things that you can do more advanced as well. And some of those things are things like you can create a custom sort order. Okay, and you can do that in Excel in a couple different ways. So the way that I'm going to show you is we're going to go using the sort feature. Now in here we had created and sorted by sales rep, magazine, and sales. But if we wanted to create a custom list, we can do that as well. So we could do that either in addition to what we've already had here, or we can also do that by itself. So if I wanted to do it without having these sorts in here as well, I could delete each level, and I could add in here. And if I go over here and drop this box down, there's an option called custom list. And it's an easy way to get to a feature that's actually in your options under file. But because different computers could be a little different, I find this to be the most consistent way to get to this feature. Once you're here, then you can make your own custom list. And you can see in here, these are some that are pre-done, but here's the one for a new list right here. And so we can go ahead and click add, and you'll see it goes over. And then I would like you to type west, north, south, and east. Okay, once I've completed that, and I actually would like it to have a little space so it looks consistent right there. And once I have that, then I have that and I can click OK. And now you'll notice I have that sort order right here. And I would like to sort the region by my custom list. If I go ahead and click OK, you'll see that now it's actually going by my custom list when it sorts. The next thing that I would like to discuss is conditional formatting. So if I go to the bottom and I click next to sort data, you'll see a worksheet called conditional formatting. And what I would like to do is I would like to do some conditional formatting in here. So I need to go back to my home tab. And there's an option called conditional formatting. I'm going to click on that. And then I have to decide what I want to do. And there's a lot of different options under conditional formatting. We're going to use the one that says highlight cell rules, and we're going to actually go between. And in the between, we're going to type in 1,000, and we're going to type in 1,200. And we're going to go ahead and change here. We have red, but we're going to go ahead and change that to the green fill with dark green text. Right now, by default, it would go ahead and pick up on whatever column I'm in. So if I try to do that, because I left it on A, now watch what happens. You don't see anything there because I wasn't selecting the column that could actually do that type of conditional formatting. So let's do it again, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Now, another thing, if you do something wrong, you can drop down. You can clear rules from the selected cell or from the whole worksheet, and you can start over. So let's try conditional formatting. Select the column cells, drop down conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, a between. By default, it's now picking numbers because it sees numbers and not letters, but we want it to be 1,000 to 1,200. And we want to change it to the green fill. Now, that's the difference by selecting that column. I now can take my conditional formatting, and I have selected those that match that particular criteria. Now, you might say, well, I can highlight the cells and do the same thing. But the difference is watch what happens if I change this to 900. It's no longer green because it doesn't meet the criteria to be conditionally formatted that way. If it goes back to 1,000, it turns green again. So conditional formatting can actually be a really useful tool to give you a really great visual under certain conditions. And that was just one, the in-between. But if you go look under there, you'll see there are lots of different options to be able to do conditional formatting, greater than, less than, and within each one of those, there's lots of options as well to be able to do different things. If you go down to top bottom rules are also really nice because again, that way you can do this like the top 10%, below average, things like that as well. You also have what's called data bars available to you and color scales, icons, which can really add, again, visual elements to a particular worksheet. The next thing I would like to talk about is Autofilter. So in the Autofilter feature, you're able to do some different things. So let's go ahead and look at that. If you click on data, you'll see the filter, and many people have used the filter before. Okay, and so we're going to go ahead and use to do some simple as well as a little bit more advanced things as well. So if you go ahead and you select a particular one, and we're going to go ahead and select the column. Now, if you select one column, it will only filter for the one. But if you think you might want to do them all, you can go ahead and select all the rows and do filter, and you'll see that you have a little filter available that way. Now, if you drop down the box, you will see that you've got lots of different options there to be able to filter by the sales rep individually or multiple by checking and unchecking the boxes. And it's a very useful feature. Sometimes, though, it can also be a little difficult because in this case, there aren't that many, but sometimes there's really a lot of different ones that you can do. So let's go ahead. We're going to cancel that. If we go ahead and do the same thing for region, you'll see that you just have the 4 regions and any blanks that are also included there. So let's go ahead and just say if we wanted to do the region, we're going to do East. If I uncheck all and just click on the East, I can select and just sort for the East. Now, I can also do things like a custom filter, which can be really, really useful. So I'm going to clear the filter, and there's 2 ways that I can do it. If I drop the box down, I can clear from region. This way I don't lose the drop-down feature for the filter at the top. But let's say I want to do like I did with conditional formatting, except this time I want to filter instead of conditional formatting. So if I drop the little arrow down, you'll see that I also have here number filters. And again, it gives me a lot of the same things that we saw when we did conditional formatting. So let's say that I want to do between again, and this would allow me to filter between 500 and say 800. If I go ahead and click OK, you'll see that now I have only the sales that are between 5 and 800. And again, there are many useful number filters available for you to be able to filter by. If you are on a column that has got something besides numbers in it, it will give you a different option. And you can see this has text filters. So you can do sorting and filtering as well by doing things that like equals to or begins with a certain letter instead of using numbers. Now, let's go ahead and move on. We're going to look at the subtotals. And being able to put subtotals can also be a very, very useful thing to do. Okay, and so again, if you do some of the more advanced type things, if you go over on your subtotals, make sure you're on that worksheet. You'll see over here you have subtotal, group, ungroup available to you. Now again, when you click on the box, you'll see that because I haven't selected anything, it tells me it has to be in a range. So again, if I want to use these particular things, I need to make sure that I go into the data itself, and then you see that it selected it for me. And now I can use whatever's in there. Now by default, it picked magazine, but let's say that's not what I really want to do, because needless to say, it's going to add a subtotal to magazine. I really want it to do, instead of counting the magazines, which is what it defaulted, I want to sum, and I want to sum up the sales, not magazine. Okay, and I want to replace the current subtotals if I had any, and I want to summarize my information below. All right, so I'm going to change on each sales rep. I'm going to sum up the sales, replace if there are any current subtotals, and again, summarize below. I'm going to click OK, and you can see I very easily can make a nice subtotal for each sales rep this way. And if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that I've got the grand total down here. Again, if you cannot see, we have number signs like that and you can't see the numbers, you just need to open it up a little more, and that will allow it to expand so that you can see what the number is. those little number signs are just giving you an indication that the width of that particular cell is not wide enough to display what's needed. So again, it's a nice way to add sophistication very easily to get these subtotals and totals in your spreadsheet. The last thing that I would like to talk about is pivot tables. Pivot tables are a very, very powerful feature. They've become very easy to use. And so again, with that, there are some things that you need to be able to know about. So again, for one thing, if I'm here and I try to insert a pivot table, you'll see that it doesn't give me a table range. I must be in the data so that it can understand that it needs to circle the data to be able to create one. It also will ask me if I want to be on a new worksheet or whether or not I want to be on the existing one. I'm going to go ahead. By default, it goes to a new one. It pops up what's called the pivot table dialog box. And in here, you'll see that you've got your row fields, column fields, data fields, as well as page fills available to you. To build a pivot table, you literally can either check the box or drag and drop. I tend to like to drag and drop, but again, it's not, there's no particular right way to do it. It's just what is more comfortable, because there's numerous ways to be able to build a pivot table this way. So what I would like to be able to do with this pivot table, because I have sales rep, region, month, sales, and magazine to work with, I would like to go ahead and build a, let's go with magazine will be my rows. And I'm going to do my regions as being my columns. And then it becomes, what do I really want to look at in the pivot table? Because this is what I'm being able to make my description of what I'm going to compare. And I want to actually look at sales. So if I go ahead and drag my sales under values, you'll see that it gives me the sum of the sales. Now, in here, by default, it summed it up because it's numbers, which is good. If I drop the little arrow down on the pivot table dialog box value field, I can click on value field settings. And it's summed, which is what I wanted to do. But if I wanted to do some things like I could do the number format, and I could put some formatting on it, and I could go out to decimal places or not. In this case right now, you can see I don't have any. So if I wanted to keep them off, I could change this, click OK again, and you can see that now it looks like sales in dollars, which is what I wanted it to look at like. Now, if I wanted to modify the pivot table view, I could do that as well. I just need to click back into it and I could make changes, right? And so again, you can do different things to be able to change things if you wanted to. But what I would like to do at this point is make a chart. So if I go back up here and I'm on my pivot table and I go to underneath here and I look, I'm under Analyze, because if I click out, the pivot table tools go away. If I click in, you'll see that it actually brings back so that I can see the fields that I have here. And I have one of the options is a pivot table chart. I'm going to go ahead and put the pivot table chart, and it gives me the options for my charts. And when I do that, I want to go ahead then with that, and I want to do a stacked column chart. By default, it didn't do that. So if I put my mouse over top of these, I can see what they're called, and you can see the one right next to it in the column is a stacked column chart. Okay, and then I can go ahead and click OK, and I now have a stacked column chart available to me. And there are things I could do to the chart. I could add a title. I can turn things on and off by using these chart elements, which is the little plus sign that's right there. So that's a pivot table chart. to be able to summarize. In this case, I'm able to build a chart that lets me look at the magazines, see what the sales are by region. Gives me a nice legend right there, as you can see on the side. And if I wanted to change something, I could at this point, or I could have done it before. So let's say that I want to make a modification and I don't want to see it in region now. If I change that, you'll see the chart automatically changes with the pivot table. And let's say I want to see it by month. You will now see that I've got, by default, it took the dates that I had in here, which says months, but it also gave me years, quarters, and it made that conversion automatically for me. But I don't really want to look at it by years or quarters, but I want to look at it by months. And you'll see here, I still have two options in there because it's showing month and month. So again, depending on what kind of format I wanted to look at, whether I want to see April, March, February like that, I could take that out, or I could look at it by the date as well so that I can see the years. So again, there are different ways depending on what you want your visual to look like and actually what you want your message to be when you actually present the information that's in the chart. The last thing in this particular video continues on with a little more about pivot tables. And so in pivot tables, what you really want to do is you want to be able to analyze things. And so again, I could use the same data like you saw in the pivot table we did before. But if you go over one more, you'll see there is some coffee data that's in here as well called Jitters Coffee. And in here, you're able to do some analysis. And so I could build a pivot table for this as well. Now, on this particular spreadsheet, I wrote some sample questions to kind of get myself started because I like to write things down so that I can make sure that when I analyze things, I know exactly what I'm thinking about when I do it. Okay, so I would could look at things like a chart that summarizes the trend over time of sales. I could look at things like calculated fields if I have the information available to be able to do that. I can do things and look like at certain years that were available. So again, there are different things that you could do that way to be able to really analyze the data and think about different types of things. Now, if you were analyzing this data from the past year on several types of coffee amounts sold from the different stores that are available out there, then you really could look at a recommendation of what are your top sellers. So again, you could look at, you've got products in here. So what are your top sellers if you were looking at that? And again, pivot tables let you very easily be able to do that. If I go to Insert, Pivot Table, I'm going to put it on a new week. Then I could say, well, what are my top products I'm selling? I bring down products. I bring revenue. It gives me the sum of each one of those. And if I wanted to know, again, what my top seller was, I can visually look to see. Or I can also create a pivot chart that would very easily let me see as well what is my top seller. And interesting enough, one of the things that I can also do is that I can even make it easier so that if I went over here and went to more sort options, right now I could do, it's by default a manual, but I could actually sort. So if I wanted to drop this down by sum of revenue, and I could sort from lowest to highest or highest to lowest, whatever I would choose to do just by, again, going to more sort options. Let's say I decide I want to go from highest. Okay, then I can do that. And so that makes it very easy for me to see that my top two that are pretty close to being tied in sales are my regular and my French roast coffee. And so again, it lets me be able to get that information and visually show it very easily. And so again, one of the other questions that I had is, so what looks like, what's the trend on this particular product? So again, I could keep this and create a new one, or I could change this if I'm done with it. So let's just say, for instance, that I want to look at the trend. Anytime you're looking at a trend, you're looking at dates. So I know I'm going to need to use the month. So I'm going to start with that. Okay. And then once I have the months in there, you can see that. Okay. And I have the sales. I can now start to look for a trend. Now, these have a complete year. Okay. And so I could go over here and do trend line, and this would give me a linear trend. Now, one of the things with this particular type of product with coffee is that you may have a seasonal effect. So even though the sales are going down here, you might want to take that in consideration and consider coffee's involved and sales are going down and you're ending in December. That's something that you might want to look closer at to be able to see why something like that might be going on. Okay, the other thing is you've got them by here, so you have to make sure, because if you see here, it's not saying whether it's 1 year's worth of data or not. So again, you would need to look at that to know for sure if you have more than 1 year's worth of data available to you. And again, you could look at that in different ways to be able to figure that out. So if I go over here, you'll see that in this case, it is only months available to me. So I would just have to assume that that's 1 year because it doesn't tell me any different than that. So this case, the trend is noticeably going down. And if I wanted to even speculate and forecast, I could extend it out by forecasting out. Let's just say I want to forecast out 3 more months here, because it'll pick the periods. In this case, it's months, so it would default to months. And if I did that, then, and I close this box right here, then you will see that it automatically extends out. And you could see that my sales in 3 months would drop below that 38,000 mark. And that literally does the linear regression for me and allows me to see the trend of the coffee sales. So again, lots of things that you can do to with pivot tables to analyze data. Another thing that's also very useful is doing calculated fields. Now, in this data, I don't have too much information to be able to try to create a calculated field. But to give you an idea of that, I will go ahead and show you what I'm talking about. So let's go ahead and say that I want to do a calculated field. So again, I have to make sure that I'm on the pivot table tools, and I look up here, I can see them. When I go up here, again, I want to click to that if I'm not seeing it. I want to go to analyze field, item, and sets. And if I wanted to do a calculated field, I could select that, and you'll see it pops up a box asking me if I want to do a calculated field. I'm going to go ahead and choose the fields that I want to use. So if I wanted to use, say, the revenue field, you can see it starts my formula. I also need to give it a name, which I'll go back and do as well. So I'm going to say equal revenue. And let's say I want to just say, because I know that really I only think that I want to have that I know I want to increase my sales by 10%. then I could go ahead and see what that would look like. And I could go times the revenue times, so I got to do 10%. So I'm going to say in here. Now, if I want to see an increase over what I've already got for 10%, then I would need to express it as 1.0 so that it adds back in the full amount. Otherwise, it would just show me 10% of that number. Now I'm going to call this sales increase, no spaces. If you try to put a space in, it will give you an error. And then I want that to be my calculated field. I can click OK, and you'll notice it does the sum of sales increase. So that's actually taking this revenue number right here, and it does a calculated field for me and increases this number by 10%. So I can easily see that if I could increase my sales by 10%, what exactly would that look like each month? And I could compare that to the increase to the revenue that's available. This would also allow me to kind of break it up and look at it differently. If, for instance, if I wanted to do something like add a slicer to look at each product individually, and that would allow me to also be able to go through and look at, say, how the decaf is doing or the French roast is doing, and be able to know that from my first one, I knew the regular was one of my best sellers. And you can see I don't have the decrease that I had in the regular, which is a good thing because it was showing a really steep decline, which tells me it's one of the other products that were causing me to have the problem. I believe the regular and the decaf were my highest. And you can see here there's a decrease in the decaf quite a bit. And I could take this even a step farther. So let's say I want to analyze that product a little more. I don't really want to see the sum of sales increase anymore, so I'm going to get rid of that for a moment. But I want to look at each of these products individually. And you'll see that my trend line says that my decaf is definitely going down. My French roast looks a little flat. Hazelnut up a little. Irish cream is up. Regular is slightly up. And vanilla is down. So it looks like the things that are causing me the most decrease would definitely be my vanilla as well as my decaf. So I could analyze this even a little farther. So suppose I want to do a little filtering now. Suppose I want to take my decaf and my vanilla, which was down as well, and see what would happen if I eliminate those two products maybe. What would my trend look like? So if I go over here and I now take product, you can see up here I have another filter. And I'm going to go ahead and actually I want to clear off this first so that I have all my cells together. And if I come up here and say I want to just look at if I remove the decaf and the vanilla, and I click OK, I now can look at the fact that for the French roast, hazelnut, Irish cream, and regular, I now have an increase instead of a decrease. So again, it lets me analyze and be able to look at how the combination of coffees may respond. Now, one other thing I would have to make sure is that I wouldn't want to lose my decaf customer altogether. So again, that could be another factor that I would have to plan for to make sure that maybe I would run a promotion that all the decaf customers could have a coupon for French roast or something different. So again, the numbers don't always tell the whole story because somebody that's doing decaf may have a reason that they're doing it and they don't want the caffeine. And if you don't have another choice, you could lose the customer altogether. So again, analysis is much deeper than just a pivot table, but a pivot table definitely gives us a way to really think and look at it from many different angles. A lot of people call it slicing and dicing. And that will conclude this tutorial.